Good day and welcome to Asakhe Online. My name is Zenzele Ndebele, and this is a special program. Unfortunately, we are talking about something that is not, something that we don't get used to. I know that, or we know that over the weekend, we lost one of the celebrated historians in Bulawayo and in Zimbabwe, Pathisa Nyathi. And we decided to play this program where we are paying tribute to him and the work that he has done. This is just one of the many encounters that we had with Pathisa, but we picked this particular program because he was talking about the Sen, who are one of the most probably, downtrodden people, Abantu Nje, who have lost their language, who have lost their identity. And Pathisa was about documenting the history of Abantu Zimbabwe, the history of Amandebele, explaining to us, how different people came to be. On a personal note, I first met Pathisa, I think around 2005, when I was doing a documentary on Kukurahundi, and I interviewed him in relation to the Ndebele raids and all those kind of things, because every time I interviewed people would say, in Kukurahundi was because of the Ndebele raids that happened. And so during the fair, or when I was doing my first documentary on Kukurahundi, I interviewed him. But I got to know that this was a man who trained as a science teacher, but ended up being a historian. In his lifetime, he wrote so many books. I think over 50 books that he wrote on Ndebele culture, Olozike, or the Kings, Olopengula. He even, one of the interesting books that I read as well was his book on Nigita Mangena. I got to learn a lot about Nigita Mangena through the book that he wrote. He also wrote a book, books about other people. He wrote the books about Advocate Mabena, many other prominent Zimbabweans. He wrote a book about Andrew Nyathi, about one of the guys in his village, Sangonjani, who was in the 5th Brigade. And in the last year or so, we actually had a conversation about visiting this guy who was in the 5th Brigade to do the interview. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and it said that he is late before we could even carry it. So he carry out the interview. So he was one person who was knowledgeable about his history. He was very proud about his history as well. And Zimbabwe is lost, Bulawayo is lost. But with this program where he was talking about Amasen, and he had been invited to be one of the speakers at the launch of a document on the Sen people of the Sen of Zimbabwe. We say, Nyathi, rest in peace.
I'm going to present, which is the historical background. One gentleman said, yeah, people are talking about the past. We are not interested in people talking about the past. We are interested in the present. And I said, no, I don't think you know what you're talking about. You cannot talk about the present in the absence of the past. It's just impossible. I come from a science background, but I quickly realized that we need history. Some of you will talk about Kukurahundi as a current issue. But you cannot talk about that subject without reference to the past. It's impossible. It was an issue that has a historical background. So we need history to understand the present. We need the present to illuminate the future. Let me, by way of introduction, and say, if we were to draw a line, a transect from here to the Kalahari Desert, you are going to see history, you are going to see the past and disempowerment of people. In history, always, the most powerful have always occupied the best land. That is a truism. If you were to look at Zimbabwe and look at Matabeleland, just this part of Matabeleland, what you are going to see are The first people, the San, they occupied the land. Unfortunately, no one can dispute that. There is evidence. They left evidence that we can never dispute. Rock art. They were everywhere. They were not where David tells you they are now. So, in that transect, they are the people who will be right at the end, the most disempowered, by those who came after them. Then this area was occupied by the Kalanga. They were more powerful than the San. They pushed them out. And then came the Rosi, Abelosi, Omoyo. They occupied the best land, Highveld, highest rainfall, the best soils, not many mosquitoes. And then, Laboge, Abelosi, wasekubuya amaNdebele. And then the Ndebele were going for the same land, the best land, by Tata Lindau. That's why Bulawayo is here. Mzilikazi, it is capital Mhlahlandlela, Inyati. All those are the best soils in this area. Then came the white men. Laye wanted the best land, and he got that one. So, by December 1893, Mvuchwa, as a farm, was established, and then is the name of another farm created before Christmas of 1893. But what is important here is to appreciate that the most powerful get the best land. And then came the war of liberation, and it was over land. And then what happened? Again, check. The most powerful are within the ruling party. You can't run away from that. Check who got the best land. So there is nothing new in that. It has always been like that. The most powerful will get the best land. Even among the whites themselves. For some of us who come from Matabeleland South, beyond the Matobo Hills, you will find farms belonging to men such as Fanfiri, Mufanfuren, Klut, and others. Those are of Afrikaner stock. The land, the best land, was taken over by people of English stock among whites. And then Afrikaners, Ofanfiri, Yibabangale Wezintaba, it's drier areas, Kuwokes ngale. That's where you find Ofanfuren and Oklut. Just by way of introduction, let's move on whoever is. Okay, now we are looking at sources of history, particularly for the San. There are people who go for skeletal remains. We don't get our history that way. As Africans, we didn't. But archaeologists make use of that. Retrieval of artifacts, we also go for artifacts. You will see what has been retrieved and is said to belong to the San. And then existence of cliques. I think David did mention that. Cliques are thousands of years old, and they are associated with the San. The Bantu in Southern Africa do have cliques, but we think they got those cliques from the San. Because it is the Bantu north of the Zambezi River, but they don't have cliques. So we got them from the San. Then rock art dates to 20, 30,000 years in Southern Africa. So rock art is very, very old. And they were painting, generally, in sheltered caves. They were painting. But once pushed out to where there were no rocks, they engraved. There's a difference between painting and engraving. Generally, they are painters. Although even now, we do not know. We do not agree on what they used to paint. But what we do know is that that paint is enduring. Some people think there was hematite, which is iron oxide. There was blood. There were certain plants. So, and there is a lot of conjecture when it comes to things San. A record, and in their rock art, is actually a form of documentation. I've said, when people do not write, it doesn't mean they do not document. It's like expressing yourself. You do not have to open your mouth. Who says that? You can express yourself in several ways. That art expresses something. Art communicates. Very soon I'll be revisiting the Zimbabwe poet to seek an Afrocentric interpretation of the Zimbabwe poet, because it is advanced African art, which we do not seem to grasp fully. But, and again, we have a problem. There are people who think the Bantu who came after the San were very different. No, it's not true. To understand a people is to understand their cosmology, their beliefs, their worldview, their philosophy. And you are going to find a lot of continuity between the two. The San used the chevron design. And you walk around the streets these days, you will see ladies putting on dresses which are appealing. And they have the chevron design. And the message carried there is a powerful message which I will not go into now. Then cultural practices, we get them from rock art. So rock art is a form of documentation. Even when the Bantu were arriving, all that is captured within rock art. I do not agree, for example, with the scholars when they give us very funny interpretations of rock art. If you want, I've written a book on that seeks to interpret rock art. I don't interpret it because I'm not well schooled in San ethnography. The San, like the Bantu, did not have shoes. And I've said, do not seek to get into the shoes of these people. What is important is to get into their minds. They had minds. We had minds. That is only way of understanding our past. Get into our minds, not into our shoes. We had no shoes. Somebody will say, oh, let's get into the shoes of the African. You get nowhere because we had no shoes. But we had minds. When we painted, the San were using the mind. Understand the relationship between the mind and the hand. Hands do not create. Be clear about that one. What creates is the mind. Hands are but servants of the people. They draw on our behalf. They sculpt on our behalf. They engrave on our behalf. They build on our behalf. The thing that creates is the mind. To understand the San, get not into his shoes, but his mind. To understand the African past, understand our philosophy, our cosmology, our worldview. And spirituality plays an important part. He talked about a tree that they can speak to. To us, yes, trees live. In biology, they will tell us trees are living. But to us, a stone has life. When you have made a pot, clay pot, and drops in our language, and language says a lot, we say the pot has died. In English, you can't say that. But in all our African languages, a pot dies. A car dies. I remember my son's son saying, Kulu, who killed your car? Then I said, yeah, he's thinking like an African. Very good. A car dies in our language, but that is expressing something about the African. Something that we think is inanimate actually has a life of its own. There are degrees of life. But these are things that professors may not fully appreciate because they don't get into the mind of the African. Western societies generally are materialistic. They think about things material, things physical. Africa speaks to trees. Africa will speak to clay. Africa will speak to pots. And the San are no exception. Yeah, next one. The name, I'll quickly try to go through these. The name, some people think, comes from a Khoi language, which means the people without cattle. We already know that these are hunter-gatherers. Khoisan came into use around 1920, 1930, and we know the man who was behind this one is Bleak, the man who said we are Bantu, after realizing some commonalities in our languages. Other names, Devi already mentioned that. Vasarwa, Bushmen, Abatwa, Varwa, so quite, I don't know how it's pronounced, Nkwa, in Kalanga, Nkwa Wangu. So you are really talking to those people. Bushmen used by colonists and is pejorative or derogatory. Loss of indigenous knowledge. Now they have lost that. We have stolen actually. Some people have stolen. There is a plant called Hotia. David did make mention of that lost indigenous knowledge. In fact, I hate to use that word, indigenous. Every knowledge is indigenous to a particular people. It is only African knowledge that is said to be indigenous, which is a way of saying they despise everything African, and only that which seems to be slightly credible is indigenous knowledge. It's all nonsensical to me. Everything is indigenous. There are things indigenous to Britain, things indigenous to Japan. So why do you want to refer to things African as indigenous? Everything is indigenous to some people. So this one is indigenous to the sun, and it's called, somebody quickly moved, Hutia Katoni, I don't know how it's pronounced, and was patented by the South African Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. And there's a pharmacy which it suppresses hunger. So they use it for dietary measures. You know what is happening to our bodies now. We used to look like the sun, slim-bodied and healthy. Now, it's something else. Right, history. Aboriginal, these are people are aboriginal to Southern Africa. They are descendants of first people to ever live here. They occupied South Africa for over 150,000 years and arrived ahead of black people and whites alike. Their gene types are found among the Caucasians, the Mongols, the Easterners, Caucasians, the Europeans, and us blacks. They are older. They are in older stock than all of us here. They are the earliest human beings. They are isolated as a group over 100,000 years ago. They were existing now as a distinct group. Attention to them was highlighted by one man called Lorenz van der Post. I think I remember reading that book many years ago. Next, they are Stone Age people. In other words, from their instruments, their artifacts, largely their weapons in particular, they were using stone, they were using ivory, and perhaps wood. Hunter-gatherers, a nomadic lifestyle, architecture reflected their lifestyle. If you are going to chase the animals, I don't think you want to build something permanent. So as a result, their shelter reflected their lifestyle. The Bantu were a sedentary people. Now they could cultivate crops and domesticate cattle. So that is reflected in their architecture. You build stronger settlements because you are going to stay there much longer. Okay, social organization. Because it is within the context of social organization that some of their weaknesses and to resist raiders such as the Bantu and the whites is traceable. Small, mobile foraging bands. Now it's easier for them to be moving in smaller bands when you are hunting, and rather than large settled groups. That is a result of domestication. That's why we have large populations settling in one place. Women were gatherers and men were the hunters. Egalitarian society, decisions were taken through consensus. That's how generally Africa used to do it. Let's move on. Language, very important for for your cultural identity, for communication, for spelling out your ideas, your philosophy, your cosmology, and defending your heritage and your rights. One dialect, can't even pronounce that, fully documented, and I think the person who was responsible for that was Dr. Blick, a German. Their beliefs, their myths were also documented by that man. Their language captures in South African motto. That South African motto translates to something like, diverse people unite, and that's a mistake. And you will see the sun on their coat of arms. Those who have seen the South African coat of arms, you will have seen the images of the sun. In Zimbabwe, I think it is the emblem for the natural history museums, which has got the sun. But they haven't been depicted to the same extent as in South Africa, where we see images, their images, in the coat of arms and also in that statement. Image captured in coat of arms, 35 Khoisan dialects spoken, 2 distinct languages, Khoi and San. Actually, the Khoi are somewhat a different people. These were haters. They're coming down from Namibia, and they were haters of sheep and cattle. Their economy, it used to be, as David said. Let's not think the San of 10,000 years ago are still, today is what we are going to find today. They've changed. They interact with other people. So there has been dynamism. There is no culture that is stagnant. One thing that remains constant in this world and in the universe is change. That one is the only thing that remains constant. The universe has been here for billions of years, over 14 billion years. But it is because it's recreating itself all the time. It's changing all the time. Change is characterized by movement. And not just haphazard movement. It is periodic movement, predictable movement, which is a way of saying there is rhythm in that movement of stellar bodies, planetary bodies, and lunar bodies. So there was no trading amongst them. They were good at giving gifts. And then a diversified economy. If you look at our economies, you find there's diversification. There are people who are doing technology. There are others who are into agriculture, others into trade, others into manufacturing. Then a narrow economic base. That is a disadvantage to them. Then look at challenges. Now, one challenge is viewing their rock art, which documents their past, from our own cultural lenses. We are very imperialistic in attitude. We place ourselves at the center and everybody else in the periphery. That's arrogance. That's what I've called it. It's arrogance. Thinking you are better than other people. There are no people who are better than others in this world. I'll never agree to that one. And do not say there's a culture which is better than another culture. There is nothing like that one. We have cultures that, yes, may differ, but the idea of saying this is better than the other, to me, is very dangerous thinking. But we have tendency, colonialism was based on that. Imperialism was based on that. And I've said, man does not kill another man. Never. It doesn't happen. But we kill men every day. Because the first thing that we do is to dehumanize them. Then I kill you. I've not killed a human being. I've killed a dog. If we had not been dehumanized, there would have been no slave trading. We were dehumanized. And do not think slave trading stopped. All that has happened is change in name. Then they will say his child is something. Yeah, it's the same thing. You are dehumanizing those people, taking them, selling them into slavery. Interpreting rock art, for example, sometimes it's very Eurocentric, and we don't even bother to consult them. No, we think we understand, we know it. Oh, those were simple minds. Let me tell you, the African mind has never been simple. Unless if you are the type that goes for cultural practices. I have said, cultural practices are a reflection of, they are informed by your cosmology, your worldview, your beliefs, your philosophy. If you don't understand that level, you will not understand the African. You will not understand the sun. What was art done to be washed? What did the sun mean by their art? Was it art for art's sake? I agree with the eminent African writer Chino Achebe when he says African art was to talk about art for art's sake is like deodorized dog shit. I agree with him. Art in Africa was never meant as art for art. There's nothing like that. We have art. I'm not talking about the current African who I don't understand. I'm talking about the ancient African. There was no art for art's sake. All our art was carried on the medium of functionality. There was art, yes. When you build a house, it has got a wall, a surface, you paint messages on it. That was art. But on a building, or it could be some other artifact, a plate, then you post messages. That was our art. Not art on its own as a standalone. It was not there. You need to understand Africa for us to understand the sun. I take them to be Africans. If you go for cultural practices, you may see a lot of differences. But look at our worldview, you will see a lot of commonalities. The chevron is there. Spirituality is there. Well, we don't have a religion. We didn't have a religion. We had spirituality. There's a difference between religion and spirituality. Louis William is one fellow that I admire, who has tried to get into the mind of the sun in order to understand them, interpret even their rock art. For example, in one of my articles in the Sunday News, I did compare the understanding of the sun regarding the eland and the African ideas. When you kill that animal, certain rituals must be performed. The sun and us have the same ideas. Kumele uthi lapha efele khona ugebhe impande ozayithola uyihlafuhlafune ucheli lokuzaliyana and make sure ukuthi uyayeqa. So there is a belief common to us and the sun regarding the inyamazana okuthiwa impofu. Failure to see continuity with Bantu culture. I've touched on that one. Africans, the Bantu should never think of themselves as a very distinct group, very different from the sun. There was continuity. There was a lot. Even in terms of diet, the things that we're eating were similar. And when the Bantu were cultivating, became cultivators, do not think they abandoned hunting, nor did they abandon gathering. They continued with those processes. Right. Why marginalization? Social organization, their social organization, those small mobile bands, no centralized polity, powerful leadership. They didn't have that. How are you going to resist raiders when you are in small groups, uncoordinated? Absence of a strong leadership covered, society not stratified, not complex. When you have virtually all your people engaged in primary production, you have a problem as a society. All of us are into agriculture. As a society, you will never advance. You are not releasing some of your best minds to do other tasks. All of them are engaged. Then, there are people who should never be on the land. That's what happened thousands of years ago. Kubo Euphrates ngali. Kubo, if you look at how those Western societies advanced, they released the people from agriculture. But those people were still eating agricultural products. That's very important. So that is a complex society. You look at the first state in Southern Africa, which was based at Mapungubwe, at the confluence of the Shashe River and the Limpopo. Right? They advanced because of, they made advances because their society became stratified. They established a strong leadership. And some people have said, the engine for development is when you have people who are up there who are exploiting other people. When you are all equal, there will be no movement. There must always be some people that are exploited. And that's how society is. They needed black labor in the United States. People to work on the cotton fields. People to grow cotton. They needed that labor. Without that initial input, you may not advance as a people. So exploit them and develop seems to have been the precedent. Okay, no military capacity to defend the state, to defend intruders taking or stealing their resources and heritage. And finally, the poor or absence of technologies. You need that technology. Technology is what gives you the upper hand to control the environment. Not as what happens now. Now we are going beyond controlling the environment, but the environment is too clever. It will hit back. Make no mistake about that. You will get more droughts, you will get more tsunamis, to a point where Mother Earth will eliminate the people who think they are clever. That's what that is going to happen. Make no mistake about that one. When we become too funny in this world, the world will destroy us. The world has the power to destroy human beings. Because these are the people that are bringing about some imbalance, some disequilibrium in the environment. The environment will recreate its own equilibrium by eliminating the agents of disequilibrium. Let's move on. Economic, we are really talking about those situations that result in their marginalization. And important to understand that let's not think of the marginalized as just sitting there doing nothing, or they are marginalizing us. Tough luck. No. You have to be proactive. You have to do something about it. You have to fight back. Fighting doesn't always mean carrying guns, carrying spears. You fight on many fora. Right, you are using those resources to fight on the legal front, for example, on social media, in newspapers, in broadcasts. That's all a war you are fighting, bringing to the attention of the world your marginalized status. Okay, their nomadic life a result of absence of domestication of both plants and animals. Today they work as farm laborers. You compare with what I see happening in Mad South. The people who are herding cattle there are mostly young Tonga boys. That's what I've seen. And then among the Bakalanga, they used, I don't know whether it's true now, they were used to work, the San were used to work for the Kalanga people, that in Kwawangu. It is what we call client relationship. No economic specialization. There has to be, if your economy and your nations are to advance, you need that diversification. There are people in industry, people in primary production, quaternary industries, tertiary industries, etc., etc. This land dispossession. Land is very, very important. The war was about land dispossession. Arrival of Bantu agro-pastoralists who took their land. Let's not think of the white men. Imperialism and imperialistic tendencies are not confined to white people. We too can be very, very imperialistic in our relationships. It's about relationships. This client relationship, internal colonization. But really the first for the San, the first were the Khoi, who were sort of superior, this sense of superiority. You then say, come and work for me. You are a poor person. And that's demeaning to those individuals. Then the San were pushed out to marginal areas. Remember when I started the transect from here to the Kalahari Desert. The weakest will be at the end. The next weakest until you get the most powerful here. Arrival of the Khoi from Namibia, who were cattle haters. And then the arrival of Bantu agro-pastoralists, I think repeated. Arrival of European agro-pastoralists. These were using the land for agriculture. They were hating cattle. And cattle, as you know, need a lot of land. And then that land was taken away from the San. They were being pushed out to more marginal lands. But that's what was happening during colonization. I'm currently writing a book on the evictions from Matebeleland, Tunkai, and Lupane. We're being evicted from the best land, Tunkai, which is characterized by those not so rich Kalahari Sands. The dark forests, as they called them, Amakuswa Mnyama. Then internal colonization, the San were displaced. Move on, I think we're getting to the end. Then political genocide. Between 1904 and 1908, German Imperial Army waged war and committed genocide on many Namibian people. And the San included. Surviving San were displaced. That's genocide. This is what the Germans did. This is why we have the Herero in Botswana. They were being pushed out by the Germans. Finally, restrictions on access to resources, restrictions to their mobility. If you can't move, their survival was based on movement. In response to migration of the animals, water resources. You want to get to where, because when in summer, water is virtually everywhere, animals are virtually everywhere. But what happens, water resources then become more and more scarce, limited, animals move to those areas, you follow them. So, genetics, don't think genetics was invented by people who tell you they invented it. Africa always knew about genetics. This is why that nyawo belongs to you and you alone. And we get it and doctor it. This is what Africa will do. But Africa today is just shaking. They are afraid. They can't stand for what is African. This is the tragedy of Africa. You can't stand for what is African. You think it's being primitive to manipulate that world. But that's your control. I've said, forget it. You are not going to equal or beat the white men in things material. But in things spiritual, we'll beat them. But what they've done, they have scandalized everything that is spiritual. They've said it's demonic, it's primitive, it's stupid, and you have believed it. Terrible. Their land was turned into parks. Those were hunting grounds, resources for them. Settlers over-hunting, reserves for their settlement were created in Botswana. You do not. Development is not about infrastructure. He said it well, Udevi. Ungakhela abantu ama-toilet and think you are developing them. Development starts and ends in the mind. Be very clear about these things. Kwenda uthi hayi sesiyabanika kithi le sibanika ama mosquito net. They are using those mosquito nets to catch fish. It's all about the mind. Please, please, please. Development is not infrastructure. Icona. A man will be happy, and development is about happiness, about satisfaction. It's about things intangible. Not material possessions. And so what? And he had to lead a miserable life of happiness. Umuntu happy azihlalele efaka igabha la afaka igabha afaka iplank uhlezi. The idea is to sit. Not to sit in style. No. So apartheid drove them out of their parks, well, no, the white men's parks, and became cheap labor. Finally, vulnerability. They can't fight for their own rights. They don't possess. They possess little Western education. Today, you need that Western education to access the world. That is a weapon. I did say, fighting doesn't mean carrying an AK rifle or an LMG. Little knowledge about legal recourse, abakwazi, weak social cohesion. You need to be a people who are networked, to stand together and fight. Fingers acting individually will not achieve much. But when they come together, says Bagera, and it is a punch. Increasing populations of the powerful pushed them to marginal areas. That's where we started. Europeans on horseback and possessing guns decimated the hunter-gatherers. Lastly, vulnerable exclusion from government decision-making. People must be involved in decision-making, whether it's government, local government, central government, but at all levels where decisions are made. To what extent are the San involved in decision-making? Ethnic discrimination. There are people who are misguided and think their ethnic groups are superior. That's one notion that I've rejected. Don't say your tribe is better than other tribes.